What if everything you ever wanted was just one trade away? Wealth, power, revenge, a second chance. The universe doesn't give freely, but there are others who will. All you have to do is sign. But remember, the price is never what you expect.
Welcome, dear souls. Here, fortunes rise, debts are paid, and destinies are rewritten. But remember, every trade has a price, and not all bargains end the way you expect. The Price She Paid, a Crimson Lantern Pawnshop story. Chapter 1, The Pawnshop That Shouldn't Exist. Maya Lin had lived in the city for over a decade, but she had never seen this street before. The alley was too narrow, tucked between buildings that loomed like forgotten giants. It shouldn't have existed, and yet, here it was. And at the end of it, bathed in the soft, eerie glow of a crimson lantern, stood the pawn shop. Its exterior was a contradiction, both opulent and foreboding. The walls were of rich, dark mahogany, polished so finely they reflected the flickering light like a liquid sheen. Ornate carvings of ancient Chinese symbols curled along the wooden beams, their delicate patterns twisting like whispering tendrils. The roof, tiled in deep jade green, gleamed even in the dim alley, as if it belonged to a temple rather than a mere shop. Yet, despite its grandeur, an unmistakable dread clung to the building. The air around it was too still, too heavy. The red lantern above the door swayed, though there was no breeze. The golden characters on the shop's sign, "We buy what you don't need," gleamed as though freshly painted, yet the edges of the wood were worn with age. The threshold of the entrance seemed to stretch slightly, like a mouth waiting to swallow. Whoever dared to step inside. A faint sound. Was it a whisper? A sigh seeped from the wooden walls, vanishing the moment Maya tried to focus on it. Her chest tightened. She shouldn't be here. And yet, she stepped forward. The moment the toe of her shoe touched the threshold, the wooden door creaked open on its own. A wave of warm air slipped through the entrance, carrying the scent of incense and something metallic. A voice, smooth and knowing, drifted from within. "Come in, Miss Lin, you must be freezing." Maya's breath hitched. She hadn't spoken her name, and yet, she stepped inside. Chapter 2, The Merchant in Black. The moment Maya stepped inside, the door shut behind her with a sound far too final. The pawnshop's interior was smaller than she expected, but also impossibly vast. Wooden shelves stretched farther than the walls should have allowed, packed with artifacts of every kind: jade figurines, rusted keys, pocket watches frozen at different hours, delicate scrolls with ink that looked too fresh, and jewelry that shimmered as though they still belonged to someone. Some objects were ordinary. Others seemed to breathe. A soft golden glow lit the space, though no visible source of light hung from the ceiling. The air was thick with incense, a mix of sandalwood, aged paper, and something metallic, like blood. Maya swallowed, hard. She shouldn't be here, and yet she was. At the center of the room stood him. A long wooden counter separated them, polished and untouched by time. Behind it, a man dressed in a traditional black changshan stood with an air of quiet command. His hair was long and smooth, tied into a neat ponytail, a contrast to his sharp, unreadable features. His hands, elegant but eerily still, rested on the counter. And his eyes, she couldn't see them. He wore round, dark sunglasses, hiding whatever lay beneath. But the way he looked at her, as though he saw through her skin, through her very essence, sent a chill crawling up her spine. Then he smiled. It was a small thing, polite and measured, but it did nothing to soften the feeling that she was being appraised, studied, weighed. "You must have many questions," he said, his voice like silk over steel. He gestured to the empty chair before the counter. "But first, why don't we start with what you've come to trade?" Maya's mouth felt dry. Trade? She hadn't come here to trade. Had she? Her fingers twitched, her mind sluggish as though something was pressing against her thoughts. nudging her toward an answer she hadn't even formed yet. The man, Mr. Zhao, tilted, his head as if hearing a thought she hadn't spoken. A desperate woman burdened by debts and ghosts of what could have been. His smile didn't falter. "Tell me, Miss Lin, what is it that you no longer need?" The words wrapped around her like a noose, suffocating in their simplicity. And from the shadows behind the shelves, something shifted. Watching. Waiting. Chapter 3. The Trade. Maya's throat felt tight. She wasn't sure what she had expected when she entered this place, perhaps a loan, a contract, something she could understand. But this wasn't normal. Her gaze flickered toward Mr. Zhao. He stood still, poised and patient, his hands folded neatly in front of him, as if time had no hold over him. He was waiting. His words still clung to the air. "Tell me, Miss Lin, what is it that you no longer need?" Maya hesitated. What kind of question was that? I don't have anything to trade." Her voice was hoarse, uncertain. Mr. Zhao let out a small hum, tapping a long, elegant finger against the wooden counter. "Oh, but you do." A shiver ran down her spine. How could he be so sure? "I'm broke," she admitted. "I don't have anything valuable. If I did, I wouldn't be here." Mr. Zhao lifted his chin slightly, as if amused by the statement. "Money is a crude measure of worth. There are other currencies in this world, Miss Lin. I do not deal in gold or silver." His head tilted slightly, and though his sunglasses hid his eyes, she could feel him looking straight through her. "You carry burdens heavier than mere debt, the weight of regret, the sting of failure, and of course," he leaned in slightly, "the dreams you no longer believe in." Maya's stomach twisted. Her dreams? What does that even mean? She asked, her voice quieter now. Mr. Zhao said nothing for a moment, merely letting the silence stretch between them, letting the tension coil like a tightening wire. Then, finally, he spoke. "You dream of success, but your dreams have done nothing for you. You wake up poorer than you were before, each night filled with visions of a future that no longer exists. Why hold on to something that only brings disappointment?" Maya stared at him, a cold pit forming in her stomach. "You're saying I should sell my dreams?" "No, Miss Lin." A faint smile curled at his lips. "I am merely offering to take them off your hands. You do not need them, and I will ensure they no longer trouble you." There was something hypnotic about his voice, the way the syllables curled and softened like the flickering lantern light above them. For the first time in years, Maya imagined what it would feel like to wake up without disappointment, without the aching realization that she had failed. No more sleepless nights spent wondering what could have been. No more bitter memories of dreams she once had. She swallowed hard. "And what do I get in return?" Mr. Zhao's smile did not widen, but somehow it felt like it did. Prosperity. His hands unfolded from the counter, palms open in a gesture almost reverent. Fortune, relief, a path unfettered by wasted longing. Maya's fingers twitched, her pulse quickened. Was that truly such a bad trade? Her dreams were worthless now, weren't they? Mr. Zhao reached into the depths of his robe and pulled out something she hadn't seen before. A thin scroll, deep red, lined with golden filigree. He placed it gently on the counter, tapping his fingers once. The ink shimmered, shifting like liquid gold. "A simple contract, Miss Lin. A mere formality." Maya's hand hovered over the parchment, hesitating. "If I sign this, I won't dream anymore?" Mr. Zhao nodded. "That is the nature of the exchange." Strange, buzzing sensation filled her ears. She thought of her wasted years, her failures, the hollow feeling of chasing something that never seemed to get closer. She thought of waking up every morning without that crushing disappointment. Her fingers curled around the pen. She should ask more questions, she should think this through. But instead, she signed. The moment the ink dried, a wave of cold air swept through the shop. The lanterns flickered. Something shifted in the walls. Maya let out a shaky breath and looked up. suddenly lightheaded. Mr. Zhao took the contract, rolling it up with precise, methodical movements. "Pleasure. Doing business with you, Miss Lin." And just like that, Maya walked out with more money than she had ever seen in her life. She never dreamed again. At least, not in the way she expected. Chapter 4. The First Signs of Horror. At first, everything was perfect. Maya had expected some kind of immediate consequence for her trade, some strange side effect, some lingering sense of loss. But there was nothing. No pain, no regret, no unease. And the money, it came almost effortlessly. Her old friend, someone who had ignored her desperate calls for help weeks ago, suddenly reached out with a high-paying job offer. A once-dead investment she had written off suddenly flourished, tripling her savings overnight. Her life had turned around so completely that it almost felt unreal. But then, the nightmares began, or rather, the absence of them. The dreamless nights. Maya had never been a great sleeper. She had spent most of her adult life tossing and turning, plagued by thoughts of what could have been, haunted by the failures of her past. But now, when she closed her eyes, there was nothing. No dreams, no colors, no sounds. She would blink, and morning would arrive. At first it was a relief. No more restless nights, no more waking up in a cold sweat. But then she started losing time. One moment she would be at home, sipping coffee. The next she would find herself standing in her office, unsure of how she got there. Entire hours vanished. Once she left her apartment for groceries, only to come to her senses 3 hours later, sitting at a bus stop on the other side of the city. And then the whispers started. At first it was just a faint buzzing sound like distant murmurs heard through a wall. Soft, indistinct, harmless. She ignored it. But as the days passed, the whispers grew. Closer. One night she woke to absolute silence. Her apartment was dark, the city sounds muffled as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Then, a voice, right beside her ear. "We live where you used to be." Maya bolted upright, heart hammering. She fumbled for the lamp, fingers shaking, breath coming in short gasps. Nothing was there, she was alone. And yet, the weight of something unseen pressed against the edges of her consciousness, watching, waiting. The next morning, she convinced herself it was just stress. She focused on her new job, her new wealth, her new life. But the gaps in time grew larger. She would open her phone to find text messages she didn't remember sending, emails she didn't remember drafting. And then she started seeing herself. One evening, while passing a shop window, she caught her reflection in the glass. It wasn't moving. Maya froze. For the briefest second, her reflection's head tilted, in the opposite direction of her own, as if observing her from behind the glass. She stumbled back, heart racing. And when she looked again, everything was normal. Her reflection followed her movements perfectly. She told herself it was a trick of the light. She told herself a lot of things. But then, 2 nights later, she woke up to find herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror, and her reflection, it was smiling. Maya hadn't moved her lips. She didn't go back to sleep after that. She stayed up watching her reflection from across the room, waiting for it to move on its own. But it never did. Not again, and yet she could feel it. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong since the day she left the pawn shop. She had traded her dreams. But what had taken their place? The whispers came again that night. "We live where you used to be." And this time, when she turned her head toward the voice, something was standing in the corner of her room, watching, waiting. Chapter 5. The Merchant's True Face. Maya didn't hesitate this time. She ran. Not to a friend, not to a doctor, not to the police. She ran straight back to the pawn shop. It was exactly where she left it, despite the fact that she had never truly known how to find it in the first place. The crimson lantern flickered gently in the night, casting its eerie glow over the entrance. The golden Chinese characters on the wooden sign, "We buy what you don't need," gleamed, as pristine as ever. The door was already open, waiting. Maya didn't think. She stepped inside. The scent of incense filled the air, thick and cloying. The shop was just as she remembered. Ancient relics, forgotten trinkets, and artifacts that seemed to pulse with a quiet, ominous presence. And at the center, standing behind the counter with his hands folded neatly before him, was Mr. Zhao. He did not look surprised to see her. If anything, he looked amused. Miss Lin. His voice was smooth, measured. You seem troubled. Tell me, did fortune not favor you? Maya's breath came out in ragged gasps. Her clothes were damp. With sweat, her mind screaming at her to turn around and run. But she knew it wouldn't change anything. She slammed her hands onto the counter. What did you do to me? Mr. Zhao did not blink. I fulfilled our agreement. Maya's fists trembled. No, you. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to steady her voice. You took something from me, my dreams, but something else came in their place. The whispers, the shadows. A flicker of something unreadable passed across Mr. Zhao's face. Was it amusement? Pity? Ah, he exhaled softly. You're beginning to understand. Maya's stomach churned. Understand what? That nature? The bore's a vacuum. She stared at him, uncomprehending. He continued, his voice smooth and patient. You see, Miss Lin, when you surrendered your dreams, you created an absence within yourself. And absences do not remain empty for long. The air felt heavier, thicker. The shelves behind him seemed to stretch into the shadows, as though something in the shop had just woken up. Maya shook her head violently. No, that's not... That wasn't part of the deal. Mr. Zhao lifted a single brow. Wasn't it? The words twisted inside her like a knife. Maya's nails dug into the wooden counter. Who are you? Silence. Then the faintest smile touched Mr. Zhao's lips. He adjusted the cuffs of his black changshan, tilting his head ever so slightly. A humble merchant. Maya's breath hitched. That's a lie. Mr. Zhao chuckled. It was a low, velvety sound, pleasant to the ears but laced with something cold beneath it. A lie. He leaned forward slightly, the dim light casting long, sharp shadows across his features. Tell me, Miss Lin, did I deceive you? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Did I force you to enter my shop? He continued. Did I trick you into signing your name? Did I promise you something I did not deliver? His tone remained light, almost conversational, but something about it unraveled inside her. Because he was right. He hadn't lied. He had simply let her choose her own fate. Maya's stomach twisted. She suddenly felt small, like a fly caught in a spider's web, only now realizing the threads had been wrapped around her all along. She clenched her fists. I want to undo the trade. Mr. Zhao exhaled softly, as if he had heard this 100 times before. Of course you do. A new contract slid across the counter. This one was thicker. The ink wasn't ink at all. Maya stared at it, her vision swimming. A life, Mr. Zhao said simply. To take back what was given, something must be lost in return. Any life will do, even your own. A chill slithered down her spine. Her mouth felt dry. A life? He nodded once. You traded away a part of yourself, Miss Lin. A trade is a trade. Nothing more, nothing less. But if you wish to reclaim it, well, balance must be maintained. Her hands shook, and in the silence, the whispers inside her head grew louder. They were hungry.
Every deal has a price, and every story has an end. But don't worry, we'll meet again soon. After all, some pacts, they're never truly over.